Hey everybody, it's John Mailhot from Imagine Communications, and one of my other jobs, I'm also the technical working group chairman of the AIMS, which is the Alliance for IP Media Solutions. And today we're going to talk about how the AIMS technical roadmap gets created and how it's evolved over the years. You've heard about the mission of AIMS. The mission of AIMS here on the screen, of course, is to foster adoption of this set of common ubiquitous standards for interoperability. But I want to highlight a couple of words in here that are important. The first word I want to highlight is one set of common ubiquitous standards. Because if you think back to 2016 when AIMS started, it was a time when there was a lot of uncertainty in the industry, and there were different vendors with different proprietary approaches to how we would do television quality, production quality video over converged IP networks. And so we looked back at what had happened in the audio industry, where there'd been adoption of, at one point, up to 10 different completely incompatible ways to move audio production into an IP environment. We said, let's not have that exact problem. So the goal of AIMS was really to create a set of certainty and, frankly, a reduction of risk among the various vendors by getting together and saying, look, we are going to try and have one set of common technical standards and common technical approaches that we use for the good of our customers, and also to reduce our own development risk rather than each of us going off and developing something completely proprietary. And the byproduct of that is the idea that there would be interoperability across vendors. And that's what we've always had with SDI. That's what we always had with, analog component, analog composite, all the systems that came before. And so this notion of interoperability between vendors is super important. Otherwise, you get the problems that we saw in the digital audio industry with the evolution of audio on IP through 10 different standards. Each vendor had to make 6 or 7 different versions of everything that worked with different other vendors. And it was terrible. So let's not have that problem. That was the mission of AIMS, was really to avoid that problem. So the key there is standards. Now, what do we mean by standards? Standards are set by SDOs like SMPTE, but there's a lot of other organizations that are also involved in the space that may or may not exactly be SDOs, but they're involved in setting different ways that equipment works or ways that the industry works together. So in this group, this AIMS technical working group, what do we do? So the AIMS technical working group meets every few weeks, and one of the first things we do is we review what's going on in this alphabet soup of different organizations that are involved in these IP media solutions. Now, these include SMPTE, of course, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, whose conference you're at. And there we talk about the 2110 suite and 2059 and all the related standards that go with the work at hand. AES, similarly, we talk about AES 70, AES 67, and some of the related documents that go with the transition of audio into IP all these years. IETF, I think our main focus right now is around JPEG XS and how JPEG XS fits into the IETF suite of standards. There's a payload format for JPEG XS and RTP that's kind of a puzzle piece to how JPEG XS fits into a lot of the work at hand. The Video Services Forum has a bunch of new work going on for 2110 over wide area networks, for ground to cloud and cloud to ground and cloud to cloud kind of communications. And of course, JPEG XS communication, not just over 2110, but also over traditional transport streams. We also talk through what's going on in the Advanced Media Workflow Association, which the new work there is around ISO 7, NMOS modeling, IS 10, security work. And then generally, there's the Joint Task Force on Network Media, which is the group that brings you TR 1001-1, which is about how things work together in a facility, and of course has been the host of the JTNM Tested program, which you've seen for a couple of years at different IBCs and NABs back when we had those. And one of the newest things, which you'll hear about in another talk, is IPMX, which is how the same suite of IP standards can be adapted and evolved into more of a pro AV space to solve a whole bunch of use cases there. Now, all that said, the other thing that the TWG is responsible for is maintaining and extending the AIMS roadmap that we just talked about, and figuring out how that roadmap moves forward over time. So back in 2016, which seems like 1,000 years ago, the original AIMS roadmap was what you see here, which was really 2022-6 SDI over IP. It was widely deployed back then. People built a lot of projects. We augmented it with AES-67 audio, and there was this new thing, VSF TR03 and its companion TR04, that were about the beginnings of elemental transport, keeping the essences separate in the network. And so the original AIMS roadmap was built around 2022-6 with an eye toward a migration into TR03 and TR04. Now, only a year later, we added in, of course, the AMWA network device discovery standards, the AMWA NMOS ISO4, as an addendum in there to say, okay, that's how you find the parts of the network. And it was the beginning of having control API standardization as opposed to just, essence on the network. Now, once that happened, of course, then a year later, funny enough, NAB 2018, somehow we only move at, fixed increments in this industry. We evolved the roadmap considerably to, instead of talking about VSF TR03, to talk about the SMPTE standards that came out of that activity. So what was originally SMPTE VSF TR03 became SMPTE 2110, so -10, -20, -21, -30. Those were all published in late 2017 and adapted into the AIMS roadmap shortly thereafter. We also, in this transaction, updated the AIMS roadmap to talk about ISO 5 and in particular connection management, because it's all well and good to have streams on a network, but if you can't tell a device which stream it's supposed to take, then it's really hard to build a system. So this was the key sort of AIMS roadmap piece, was adding in ISO 5, adding in the real SMPTE standards. And at this point in 2018, we started to see projects. We started to see people building real systems and building out networks and lots of stuff going on. In 2019, at sort of the +3 from the foundation of AIMS, we added in the JTNM TR1001. Now, this was a really important document because it describes not just, how do you find devices, how do you switch a stream, but a bunch of other system environment behaviors. If I build a device, how does it know what it's going to find in the network? How does it get its addresses? How does it find the registry server? So this JTNM TR1001 is really a joint effort on the part of a lot of people to put together a framework. How does a system look like? How does a system work? How do devices fit within the context of a system? And so it incorporates a lot of IT industry technologies so that, there's no reason to reinvent those things for television, but it says how to use them and which features of those technologies we're going to use so that you can together build a system that different vendors can be a part of without everybody having to do a ton of specialty work. So that was kind of the state of the AIMS roadmap at NAB 2019. Now you might ask, what did we do at NAB 2020? And of course, we all know what we did at NAB 2020, which is we all stayed home. There were no modifications to the AIMS roadmap in 2020. Now, let's go back and visit that mission thing again. So we talked about the mission. So this mission, of course, was to foster the adoption of a set of common, ubiquitous, standards-based protocols for interoperability. So have we accomplished that mission? Well, that's a question, right? Because you could say, yeah, that's a pretty good set of things, but there must be something more. So what is next? What really serves our mission? Because within a facility, the data plane, the environment, the connections, we've talked about that. That work is pretty much done from a roadmap standpoint. People are building systems, people are deploying systems. It's going okay. But there are opportunities. There are things to do next. So one of these opportunities is around common control and status and monitoring APIs, because you can build a system and have it switch and everything, but there's not currently common APIs for talking to devices to find out common things like, did you really get that stream? Do you have any alarms? Are you happy with the video you're getting? We never had that in SDI either. I mean, that's been historical as an industry. We've never had common APIs for stuff like that. But here we are in the modern era. It would help as an industry to have some amount of commonality. So this is actually a work in progress inside the AMWA and inside some other organizations. So if standards evolve with enough support in the member community, then we'll put those on the roadmap and make it part of our official roadmap. But first, the standards have to exist. So first, we have to sort of foster the development of the standards, and then they get on the roadmap. We have to have one before the other. Another whole area that we've not really touched on is how do you go between places? All this is well and good within a facility, but suppose you have to go between New York and LA or New York and Washington or wherever your facilities happen to be. Ground to ground, or even, you're going to host stuff in a cloud environment, a hosted environment. How do you go from ground to cloud? What are the right technologies for that? So there, of course, there's opportunity as well to use JPEG XS, perhaps over 211022, or some other appropriate compression, although JPEG XS is the one that everyone loves just now, to go between facilities, or to go from ground to cloud or cloud to ground. Well, that works best if it's written down somehow. How exactly are we going to do that? How exactly do we keep track of time? How do we keep track of timing? How do we keep interessence timing together? So that's actually work in progress inside the video services forum to document these use cases and how they fit together and what are the relevant technical standards we're going to use to go from, facility to facility or ground to cloud and cloud to ground. The third thing that's going on out in the industry is really between instances within a cloud-like environment. So if I have a thing running in the cloud, another thing running in the cloud, how do I get video from one of them to another? Because you could be sure you're going to want to do that. And currently is not a great way. So that's actually another work in progress inside the video services forum of how do we write down an API or an interface that you can use between instances like that. And that's being done, with including the different cloud providers in the conversation, because they each may have different technologies that come to bear on that. So these are all the things we're doing and looking at that serve our mission going forward. And all in all, that's who we are and what we do in the AIMS Technical Working Group. So thank you so much for your interest and enjoy the rest of your day.